God is light, in whom there is no darkness at all. Jesus Christ is the light of the world. And this is the problem. The light has come into the world, and we loved the shadow rather than the light. My name is Caleb Williams. I'm the pastor here at Milwood United Methodist Church, and it is my honor to welcome you this evening to our service of Good Friday, recommending the darkest and hardest night of our year, the darkest night of life in this faith. And we've been on a journey around here, a journey through a season called Lent and a journey through this week that we call Holy Week, walking step by step. And tonight is an important step, but it is not the last step. So please know that early Sunday morning, we will be gathering again at 7 a.m. down at Milwood Park at the pavilion. I'll give you a chance to have church before you even start cooking breakfast. And then come here at 10 a.m. When the stained glass will be unveiled again, and the light will be streaming in metaphorical ways and real ones, while brass and bells and choir and a full house will be singing praise. But not yet. We're not there yet, because Easter doesn't mean much without tonight. Without Good Friday, there is no dawn without the night. And tonight we bear witness to the shadow of this world, the midnight of suffering, abandonment, and death. The Latin word for shadow is tenebrae. Tenebrae is also the name of a tradition in worship where we extinguish candles one by one. So I invite you, as we enter this place, to quiet your heart. Find a quiet place in your mind. Take a deep breath and prepare yourself for tenebrae. Would you join us in song? We're flipping things around because the sermon is not the most important part of this service. This is probably good news for all of you. Darkness. I will admit, the first thing I think of when I think of the dark is being a kid and being afraid of it. It's true, maybe it was just particular to me, but we had a routine where you check under the bed, check in the closet, make sure you've tucked in the corners. Okay, it's not just me. Good to know. And it's all because there are those things that might be terrorizing you, and you got to make sure that you're cleaned off and your clothes off and you don't have to think about them. And I will admit, as a 37-year-old, I still have those things. when I'll admit it, probably most when I'm scrolling social media. The TikTok, and I'll be flipping through, I'm like, escaping, this is all fun stuff, and then suddenly something shows up on the screen that I know is darkness. It is something hard, something heavy, and I scroll as fast as I can, hoping that it doesn't sink into my brain long enough to mess up the good feelings I'm having. I just want to get it out of here. Is anybody else, am I just the social media addict around here? That's fine. And I flip past it hoping that it won't sink into me, so I don't actually have to deal with it or face it. And I think that's true for the rest of our lives too. You ever been driving down the highway and there's a wreck to the side, and part of you've got that morbid curiosity, you want to look, but you also don't really want to see anything. You don't really want to see anything that would be too hard. You want to look and see that everyone's okay. Yeah. We have trouble opening our hearts to the horrors of this world. So all week, we've been walking. We've been walking with Jesus through the triumphal parade, and we were walking into that upper room together where we sang our songs and washed and ate together. But if we really, really want to walk with Jesus, we don't just get to walk with the triumphal parade Jesus. We don't get to just walk with the baby Jesus from Christmas, even though that's really nice. We don't get to just walk with the Jesus who was doing miracles and healings and teaching all this great stuff and working for justice in this world for the outcasts and the poor. No, there's some steps that aren't so fun. Some steps tonight that are up that hill. Some steps tonight that are through the darkest day of his life. So tonight, that's our job. It's our job to come face to face with that shadow. Because the first Good Friday, those 2,000 years ago, was a day of shadow. I don't know what the weather was, but we know that it was the day that the man we call Christ was murdered. He was murdered outside the city wall on a hill called Golgotha, the hill of the skull. And he was murdered in front of his friends, in front of his family, in front of his mom. That's the mom who remembers that baby Jesus from Christmas in that moment. This is real darkness. He was stripped and beaten and forced to carry the method of his own demise. He's practically digging his own grave on the way up that hill. All that after being betrayed by one of his closest friends. Not to mention being betrayed by the people who shared a faith with him, the church leaders. It's really tempting to look away. To look away tonight, but we have to stick with him in this moment and actually open our hearts to his suffering. And you might be saying, why? Why does that matter tonight? Why does that matter? Because here's the trick. Jesus is still suffering. He's still suffering in so many faces in this world today, maybe some faces here tonight. Because there's this little story in the gospel that says, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and give you clothes to wear? When did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king replied, I assure you that when you've done it for the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you've done it for me. My friends, there is suffering in this world. And every time it's happening, we know that Jesus suffers still. There are people who are hurting. There are children in our neighborhood. There are children across this country who are afraid. We know that the number one cause for death of our youngest ones still remains firearms. We know that too many Americans don't have health insurance. We know that our schools are unable to support our teachers, and our teachers are unable to support our children. We know that there is disease, there is Alzheimer's and dementia, there is cancer, there is domestic violence, there are folks who are fleeing from their families, there are folks fleeing from their governments, and there are folks who wish they could flee, but they are part of the millions of Americans who are incarcerated. There are folks hurting tonight, and Jesus suffers still. So if we really want to be walking beside Jesus, it's not just the parade, friends. We get to walk side by side those who are hurting. We get to show up one more time and bring a little bit of the light to that darkness, or we get to just sit in that darkness with them. Whenever we do it for the least of these brothers and sisters. So tonight, we're going to practice that. We're going to experience the darkness, and we're going to tell the story of Jesus' suffering, not so that we get to feel bad right now, but so that our hearts might be ready to see Jesus suffering in every person we meet. So we might be ready to see Jesus' face in that stranger walking by, in that person who may never have heard the good news that comes in a couple days. So tonight, we sit in the shadow and we face the darkness.
Jesus went forth with his disciples across the Kidron Valley, where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. Now, Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, for Jesus often met there with his disciples. So Judas, procuring a band of soldiers and some officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, went there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Then Jesus, knowing all that was to befall him, came forward and said to them, "Whom do you seek?" They answered him, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus said to them, "I am he." Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. And when he said to them, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. Again he asked them, "Whom do you seek?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. So if you seek me, let these men go." This was to fulfill the word of which he had spoken. "I did not lose a single one of those whom you gave me." Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's slave and cut off his right ear. The slave's name was Malchus. Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword into its sheath. Shall I not drink the cup which the Father has given to me?"
So the band of soldiers and their captain and the officers of the Judean authorities seized Jesus and bound him. First they led him to Annas, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. It was Caiaphas who had given counsel to the religious authorities that it was expedient that one man should die for the people.
Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. As this disciple was known to the high priest, he entered the court of the high priest, along with Jesus, while Peter stood outside at the door. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the woman who guarded the gate and brought Peter in. The woman who guarded the gate said to Peter, "Are you not also one of this man's disciples?" He said, "I am not." Now the servants and officers had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing and warming themselves. Peter also was with them, standing and warming himself.
The high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Jesus answered him, "I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple, where all Jewish people come together. I have said nothing secretly. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. They know what I said." When he said this, one of the officers standing by struck Jesus with his hand, saying, "Is that how you answer the high priest?" Jesus answered him, "If I have spoken wrongly, bear witness to the wrong. But if I have spoken rightly, why do you strike me?" Annas then sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest.
Now, Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. They said to him, "Aren't you also one of his disciples?" He denied it and said, "I am not." One of the servants of the high priest, a kinsman of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked, "Didn't I see you in the garden with him?" Peter again denied it, and at once the cock crowed.
Then they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to Pilate's headquarters. It was early. They themselves did not enter the headquarters so that they might not be defiled, but might eat the Passover. So Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" They answered him, "If this man were not an evildoer, we would not have handed him over." Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." The religious authorities said to him, "It is not lawful for us to put any man to death." This was to fulfill the word which Jesus had spoken, to show by what death he was to die.
Pilate entered the headquarters again and called Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it to you about me?" Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingship is not of this world. If my kingship were of this world, my servants would fight that I might not be handed over to the religious authorities. But my kingship is not from the world." Pilate said to him, "So, you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I'm a king. For this I was born, and for this I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." Pilate said to him, "What is truth?"
After Pilate had said this, he went to the religious authorities again and told them, "I find no crime in him, but you have a custom that I should release one man for you at the Passover. Will you have me release for you the King of the Jews?" They cried out again, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a robber.
Then Pilate took Jesus and scourged him, and the soldiers plaited a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and arrayed him in a purple robe. They came up to him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" and struck him with their hands. Pilate went out again and said to them, "See, I'm bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no crime in him." So Jesus came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Jesus said to them, "Behold the man!" When the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no crime in him." The religious authorities answered him, "We have a law, and by that law he ought to die, because he has made himself the Son of God." When Pilate heard these words, he was the more afraid. He entered the headquarters again and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave no answer. Pilate therefore said to him, "You will not speak to me? Do you not know that I have power to release you and power to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no power over me unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me to you has the greater sin."
Upon this, Pilate sought to release him, but the religious authorities cried out, "If you release this man, you are not a friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself a king sets himself against Caesar." When Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Pavement, and in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. He said to the religious authorities, "Behold your king." They cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." They handed him over to them to be crucified.
So they took Jesus, and he went out, bearing his own cross, to the place called the place of a skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on either side, and Jesus between them. Pilate also wrote a title and put it on the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Many of the Judeans read this title, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city. And it was written in Hebrew, in Latin, and in Greek. The Jewish chief priests then said to Pilate, "Do not write, 'the King of the Jews,' but this man said, 'I am King of the Jews.'" Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written."
crucified Jesus, they took his garments and made 4 parts, one for each soldier, also his tunic. But the tunic was without seam, woven from top to bottom. So they said to one another, "Let us not tear it, but cast lots for it to see whose it shall be." This was to fulfill the scripture. They parted my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots.
So the soldiers did this. But standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing near, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her to his own home.
After this, Jesus, knowing that all was now finished, said to fulfill the scripture, "I thirst." A bowl full of vinegar stood there. So they put a sponge full of the vinegar on hyssop and held it to his mouth. When Jesus had received the vinegar, he said, "It is finished." And he bowed his head and gave up his spirit.
Sometimes
since it was the day of preparation, in order to prevent the bodies from remaining on the cross on the Sabbath. For that Sabbath was a high day. The religious authorities asked Pilate that their legs might be broken and that they might be taken away. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the other, who had been crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once there came out blood and water. He who saw it has borne witness. His testimony is true, and he knows that he tells the truth, that you also may believe. For these things took place that the scripture might be fulfilled. Not a bone of him shall be broken. And another scripture says, they shall look on him whom they have pierced.
After this, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly, for the fear of the religious authorities, asked Pilate that he might take away the body of Jesus. And Pilate gave him leave. So he came and took his body. Nicodemus also, who had at first come to him by night, came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds weight. They took the body of Jesus and bound it in linen cloths with the spices, as is the burial custom of the Jews. Now in the place where he was crucified there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb where no one had ever been laid. So because of the Jewish day of preparation, as the tomb was close at hand, they laid Jesus there.